Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the February Ask I2 event. This is our 13th of these live streams now. I can't believe it's been that many. And our second of this year. And actually, it wasn't that many weeks ago since we did the last one because February is quite a short month. But nonetheless, there's quite a lot to talk about this week. We've actually had 2 Forest Pack releases already this year. And we are just releasing the Railclone beta as well. So I will talk a little bit about both of those things. I'm just going to bring Jaime into this call if I can, so give me a few seconds to sort that out. Hello Jaime, can you hear me? Sorry about this, won't be a second. Okay, we'll see if we can sort this out. A little bit of a technical hiccup today, just getting Jaime in on the call, but nothing to worry about. So okay, without further ado, hello Jaime, you are live on YouTube.
Yeah, apologies to everyone. I had last minute setback, so welcome everyone to the live tutorial, and please go on, Paul.
Lovely. So just saying, we've had 2 releases this year, and we've just got the Railclone beta out just a week ago or so, and we're going to talk about a few of those things today. Yep. So I'm going to start with the Forest Pack 8.0.8 release. So this is a 0.0 release, so it's not like a major release or anything like that in terms of don't expect a fully fledged massive feature set, but nonetheless these little point releases do add quite a few useful little improvements, and if you're not paying attention, it's easy to let them pass you by, and that's a shame because some of them can really help out with your work. So I wanted to take a little bit of time at the beginning of this live stream just to explain how these two particular improvements can work. So I'm going to start with some changes to forest sets. So forest sets, as many of you know, were introduced with Forest Pack 8, and they're basically like a container plugin, a receptacle into which you can put splines or objects or anything you want really, and then you add that set to Forest Pack and it pulls all of the objects out of the container and uses them as though they're individually added. And it can make working with complex setups much easier, and it can make things like adding multiple objects that you want to remain separate to Forest Pack, but then you sharing the same set of parameters much easier. One of the limitations of forest sets in the original version of Forest Pack 8 was that they didn't work as object exclude areas at that point, but with Forest Pack 8.0.8 they now do. So I'm just going to show you what that means exactly in this kind of simplified exercise file, as they always are, just to make the teaching a little bit clearer. So what you've got here is a single Forest Pack scatter, and I've got 4 buildings, and these are V-Ray proxies, and they're all separate. So they're all separate, but we can see the trees are inside the building, so we don't want that. In older versions of Forest Pack, to exclude those, well, you could either draw a spline around them if you wanted and do it that way. That would be, of course, absolutely fine. But the other way is to just use the buildings themselves as an exclude area. And the reason for doing that might be then if you move the building, you don't have to remove all the associated splines and everything else. So the way you do that is you'd come over to the geometry panel, which is down here, or areas panel, sorry, and then the second one in here, the little teapot, lets you add an object area. And all you do is pick something from the scene like that, and you can see they've gone from inside the building, the trees. On top of that, you've got a scale option here, and that just scales the exclude area. So if you want to move the buildings a little bit further from that building, you can just increase that. And you've also got a resolution setting here, and that's because the way this works is that basically a black and white bitmap is generated by looking down on the Z-axis, and it creates a map which is using this resolution. So if you find that it's not quite accurate enough and you need it to be a little bit more accurate, what you can do is increase the size of that resolution there. So that's all well and good. Now I've got 3 other buildings, so in the olden days we'd have to add each one of those buildings separately as a new object layer, and then change the settings for each one, which is not the most efficient way of doing things. So now what you can do instead, and I'll just delete that one, is to add a forest set. So I'll come up to my little button up here, forest set button, drag that out into the scene, and now what I'm going to do is to add all 4 of those buildings to this set. So I'll just pick these from here, click on add, and they're all in there. I don't need to do anything else, and then I can come back to my forest object, and then just wait for UI to load. We can add that forest set as an object area, like so, and then you can see that's just one object in my areas list, and I can change the resolution, set the scale, and it affects all 4 of these objects, like so. Okay, so that's just much more efficient way of working, and it also means that if I had something else in here, like another object that you decide you want to add another object to the scene, like this teapot shaped building here, then all you need to do is to find the forest set and just add that teapot to the list, and it updates the forest object from there. Likewise, if we delete the teapot, we can get rid of it. So that's really quite cool. And another thing you can do as well with forest sets is you can have them automatically load in objects from a layer. So if instead of having to add them to this, we just used our normal scene organization tools instead, then what we can do is just add stuff to layers. Oops, I've just accidentally docked that. Just add stuff to layers and they'll automatically be populated in Forest Pack. So at the moment, let's take the forest out of the layer, otherwise it's referencing itself. What I've got here is a layer called objects, and what I can do in my forest set is come down to from layers here, just turn that on and type objects. You have to enter the name of the layer at the moment. There's not a picker, that may change. And now what will happen is that anything I add to that layer should automatically be removed from the forest pack object. And you saw that work there. Let's add these other 2. Like so. So it's really quite straightforward, and likewise taking something out of the layer will remove it. So you can just work with your normal layers here and have it update forest pack, which is really, really handy. Great. Are there any questions so far? I don't think so.
No.
All quiet.
So
All quiet. Lovely. So another thing that we added, which was a request from users, was how to use edge trimming, which we all know is the technique you can use with path-based distribution mode, where it crops out individual parts of the mesh based on the boundary splines. How can you use that if you're using custom edit mode? Because obviously sometimes we convert to custom edit mode to do some final tweaks and move things around, but at that point you lose edge trimming. So we have made that possible. There are a few caveats. This is not as efficient as doing it in the usual way with areas, so I wouldn't do it on huge areas, huge scatters. This is really for refining things in the foreground. So that's the sort of use case you want for this. And the other caveat is that we've built this into forest effects, so you are going to need to use a forest effect for this. This is very new, only added recently, so we haven't got a built-in forest effect for it at the moment, but we can certainly add a preset so you don't have to code anything in the future. That said, it's super easy to set up. So here I've got a forest pack object, and if I drop into items view, you can see this is a custom edit mode object, so I can move all these things around and place them individually like so. But of course that means that I couldn't, for example, use this spline here as a trimming spline because I'm in custom edit mode and it doesn't work. So how would you do that? Well, from this version of Forest Pack onwards, we can add a forest effect and just enter a line of code and that will work for you. So what I'll do is hit on the plus button here to add a new effect and then click on the editor. This brings up our expressions. Now all you need to do is to find the effect. Basically you don't have to remember it, just come into functions, second tab in, go to Forest Pack, and somewhere in here it should say Forest Pack Trim Edge Spline, FP Trim Edge Spline. And you can see if you ever wondering how this thing is used, you can read a little description from the panel at the bottom here, and this one says it's going to take two inputs, a spline and a mode. We'll talk about the mode in a minute, but obviously we need to input a spline. So how do we add a spline to this parameters list? Well, we go to the parameters tab here and click on the third button in, which adds a scene object. And you can see it adds a little property list here and it gives it a name. I'm just going to remove the one. The name is how you will refer to this spline in your expression. Okay, so that name's important to remember. It doesn't just display down here, but it's also how you reference the spline in your expression. So now we can come back to our functions and enter, and to double click on it, you don't have to write it, Forest Pack Trim Edge Spline. Open a bracket. Remember what we called this parameter? It was called spline, so we'll just write spline here, comma, and then the second parameter is a mode, so this can either be a 0 or a 1. And in a 0 it will trim outside the area, and if it's a 1 it will trim inside the area. So just to illustrate that, we'll leave it at 0 for now. Put a semicolon afterwards, hit evaluate. This will not show you anything in the viewports. This is a render time only effect. And then I'll hit OK. And if I do a quick render, we should hopefully see that works. Let's hope the streamer can cope with rendering as well. And then we'll see if this is okay. I can see there's a question there. I'll get to that in just a second. That didn't work very well at all. So it helps if after you've added the spline parameter, if you pick a spline from the scene. So let me try that again. I'll pick a spline this time, and then let's just hit render again. Now that makes much more sense. Okay, so you can see that in mode 0, I have trimmed away everything outside of the spline, even though I'm in item editor mode, custom edit mode. That wouldn't have been possible in previous versions. Remember, this is in the mode where you can move objects around individually. And say all I need to do if I want to use this to trim what's inside the spline, which I would say is probably much more common for final refinements and detailing up towards the foreground of the shot, which is when you're most likely to use this effect, you would change this mode to 1 and hit evaluate and OK. And now you should see the inside of that has disappeared. Okay, so this is trim editor, trim culling with items editor mode. Now actually this works in, I'm talking about this in relation to items editor mode because you know that's the one where you really couldn't use it before, but actually it works in any of the distribution modes. So as well as image-based mode, which you wouldn't really use it in because you'd use an area instead, but it's possible. You can use it with path distribution mode, pflow distribution mode, and I can't remember what the other one was, reference distribution mode too. So that makes edge trimming available to all of the different distribution modes that are available in Forest Pack. Good. So there is a question there by the looks of it.
Yeah, this question, Paul.
Okay, so the question is, can the selection of objects in the lister be changed? For example, you have to select one object at a time and delete them. Can this be changed and made easier, like select 3 or 4 objects at once and delete them? Actually, yeah, no, you can do that. So I can show you that quickly here. Let me just create a couple of just sacrificial Forest Pack objects here, and then open the lister and update it. So here's my lister. So if you want to delete them, then what you can do in fact is click these little buttons here, and if you hold down Control you can pick multiple ones. Now that doesn't actually select them, but if you click this button here, it says select objects, and now I've selected those 3, whatever I've got selected here basically, I've selected in the scene, and now I can hit delete and delete them. So it is possible to do a multiple selection like that, if that's any help. A new editor skin, I'm not sure what that means. Maybe you have to elaborate on that one. I don't know if that's a request or a statement, but someone's written new editor skin in the chat there. So let me know what you mean by that, if that's something I need to respond to. Not the forest object, but the geometry. Right. I see. So, okay, revising that question. The question is actually about the geometry inside the list. So, okay. No, then that's not possible. Thank you. That's a suggestion. Then I will pass that on. But also, hopefully, we all learned a handy tip there about how you can select multiple things in the Forest Pack lister. So it's not all bad. And another question there, also in the effect editor, can a search bar be introduced so you can just type the effect that you're looking for and it selects it rather than opening all the drop downs and searching for it? That's a good suggestion. I'll pass that one on too. So that would be a search at the top here. Also, I think an autocomplete would be quite nice. So I think those are good suggestions. I'll pass those on. Lovely. So I don't want to spend too much more time on Forest Pack 8. I think that was probably the two main things I wanted to introduce. If you want to see all of the details about what was included, there is a post on our website here where you can get a little bit more information, and there is of course the release notes which are linked down here somewhere as well. So do please take a look at those if you're interested. Right, so the other sort of big announcement of the last few weeks really is that we've got a Railclone 6 beta out, which is available for anyone to try as long as you have an active Railclone maintenance plan. So anyone can download this and start playing with it now. And it's got a lot of features in it. This is the sort of provisional changelog here, showing what's new in Railclone 6. And we'd obviously really like it if as many people as possible could test it, but there were a couple of features that I felt needed a bit of explanation so that people could test them. And in particular, I wanted to talk about one of the big new improvements, which is Railclone Slicer. So some of you, if you've ever lurked on our forum, may have found a script in the past called it was basically a slicer script that would cut up geometry in preparation for use in Railclone. But it was a Mac script, and you know, it was a bit clunky, and the workflow could be improved. So what we've done is taken that kind of original seed of an idea and turned it into a modifier, and that will work directly in Railclone without you actually having to literally slice things into separate pieces of geometry that exist in your scene. So let me just load up a file so you can see this. I'm going to do this on some very basic examples just to illustrate today how this works, but obviously you could use it for much more sophisticated things. Rightio. So I've just got some assets from Chaos Cosmos actually, just because they happen to be there. And I'm just keeping it simple. I've just got some benches, and basically these are obviously non-parametric benches. These are just simple pieces of geometry. But let's imagine that for some reason we wanted these to be parametric so that we can adjust the length of them and the size of them at any point. I know that's not entirely a plausible use for a bench, but it does help to illustrate how this tool works. I'm just deleting these modifiers I've put on here first. Okay, so what we need to do is to prepare this for Railclone. So keeping it simple in this case, as we would with Railclone, what we'd want to do is to make this kind of Railcloneable, we'd want to slice the ends off and have the middle bit separate, right? So we'd have an end, a middle bit, and then the other end. And then we could basically scale or duplicate the middle bit as long as we wanted to make that, to make this bench resizable. So what we can now do is use this new Railclone Slicer tool to cut this bench up. So it works pretty well in easy. You just come into your modifier list, and in here somewhere you will find an RC slice modifier. And here it is. And it basically has toggles that you turn on here, which will enable you to isolate a bit of geometry that you plan to use in that particular input. So you'll see the naming conventions here should be the same as the naming conventions in the generators in Railclone, right? So we've got a start piece here, an end piece, and a default piece. Those names should be familiar if you're a Railclone user. So what you do is you turn the start on, and then you would enter a value here, or just increase it to... Have I actually got that object selected? No, of course not. Let me select the actual thing that I'm trying to slice. That would be helpful. There we go. Right, so if I enter a value here, you should start to see here, there's an extra slice put in here. So we can move this around. Maybe we'll bring it back a little bit closer to where the end of the bench is. Maybe 10 centimeters is about right. So what we've done basically, you can't see it yet, but we've basically put a slice in here, and this end of the bench now is kind of separate. Now if I do the same at the other end, and I can also enter 10 centimeters, that will be the same. Then I've also cut the other end off, and then we want a default segment, so that's going to be whatever's in between. So we'll add a default segment that will start from about 10 centimeters, doesn't have to be, but 10 centimeters from there. And then how far is it going to go? Well, that's anyone's guess, but I'll start with 80 centimeters, and you can see I can adjust it. So you should see that line moving there. Okay, so that's basically sliced that bench into 3 in a single modifier. Now, if I come down now and hit export slices, you can see those pieces here. They all share the same pivot point, so that'll be important for later. But you can see I've created from that bench 3 pieces. But where this is interesting is that actually I don't need to create these segments, because I can just add this object straight into Railclone and have it pick the pieces out of the original piece of geometry. So I'm going to show you how to build this style from scratch this time to illustrate this workflow. It's a simple style anyway. And then later on I'll show you how this can be even faster if you've already built a sort of series of templates up for yourself, so that you can just swap geometry in. So in Railclone, I'm going to add a new Railclone object, and I'm just going to keep this super simple this time. So I'm just going to open up my graph editor here, and I'm just going to add a linear generator, and I'm just not going to use a spline. Just going to export the x size parameter and control it that way. So I'll set this to a scene unit, wire that in, and then let's say it's going to be a meter or something for now. So I'll set that size down here, 1 meter. And that's ready to go. So now what we want to do is to add our segment. So we'll add a segment in. I'm going to set the Z axis to pivot, because the middle of the bench will be on the floor otherwise, and then wire it to the default input. Now if I just pick this object from the scene, what you'll see is the whole bench is picked, as you'd imagine, and it's cut off after 1 meter. But what I can do is come to the bottom of the segment properties, and at the bottom here where it says Railclone slice source, I can pick which part of that mesh that I've sliced I want to use for this segment. And you can see there's a list there of all the various inputs that you could possibly generate from any piece of geometry. So I'm going to pick start, and then actually I should wire it to the start input, that would probably be more helpful. And then you can see I've just got the start piece that I sliced with the modifier being used there. If I clone this, and by the way, in Railclone 6 you can hold down shift and drag to do that, then I can wire this to the end, and I'll just choose the end input here, and now I've got the end. And now shift and drag that next one, change this one to default, and wire it to the default input. Then you might want to change the rules to either scale or adaptive, and there we've got a procedural object which is based on this source object, which has just got a Railclone slice modifier on it. So the nice thing about this is that once you've got this set up, is that you can very quickly and easily start to create other versions. So for example, I might just copy this slice modifier and apply it to this bench. I may need to adjust it a little bit depending on where the slices are. It seems like they need to come in a little bit further. So I'm just adjusting the slice a little bit, because to account for the fact that the sides are a little bit thicker. But now I can take this rail clone object. I can really quickly create a parametric object from that. So I'm just dragging this across to make a clone. I'm going to open the style editor. Here it is. And here's another small change, right? So this is already set, right? I've already told it which segments to use if there's a rail clone slicer object applied. All I need to do now is apply this new piece of geometry to all 3 of these segments. Now, in old versions of Railclone, you'd have to have done that one at a time, but in this version of Railclone, I can select all 3. I can click on this button here, and I can assign it to all 3 segments at once. And now I've got a new parametric object with different geometry. That's pretty cool. And you can keep going like this. You know, this is very fast, so I can take this slice modifier again, copy it. You can see how quick we can start to get with this. Paste it on here. Let's take this rail clone object, clone it. And then we can do the same thing. So another thing you'll notice at the moment is that my style editor is still here. And that's because in Railclone 6, you can see I can select anything, and the style editor from the last object in which I open the style editor stays on screen. So you can still edit this, even though I haven't got the Railclone object selected any longer. That's really handy for being able to edit the segments and the base geometry and keep working in Railclone at the same time. So if I want to switch to the style editor for this object here instead, all I need to do is to select it and then click open style editor, and it swaps it to the currently selected Railclone object. So I'm just creating a few Railclone objects here, and you can see how that works. Pretty straightforward. Obviously, if I had select segment material on here, it would pick the segment material from the source, so I wouldn't need to assign the material, although you can if you prefer. In this case, it would be fine.
We have a bunch of questions.
So hopefully that's a handy sort of feature. There's obviously a little bit more to it. So for example, this one here, this bench is a little bit more problematic because it's got a handle in the middle of it. So this one we'd have to do a little bit differently, and I'll just show you this one as an exception. And I can see there's some questions. I'll get to those in a minute. If I had a Railclone slice to this one, add start. Let's maybe add 15 centimeters. I'm just guessing these values, 15. And then the default segment, well, that'll start at 15. And this time, so you can see here, if you can see it moving, here is my slice about here. So I don't want it to go over this handle that's in the middle here. So I'm just going to go up to about 23, if I can get that. Yep, 23 seems to work. But now I've got one in the middle, so this time I can introduce another part of the kind of another segment, if you like. I'll turn on X evenly. I'll start that at 23, and then I want to go until I get to the other side of the sorry, not 23, 37 or something like that. And then I want to go to the other side of that handle. Something like that. And then just to illustrate this so that you can see it, again, we don't need to do this, but I'll just export the slices so you can see what I've made. So I've got an end, I've got a default segment, and then I've got a middle piece. Okay, so that's pretty cool. And then I just need to add a different, slightly different setup in Railclone. So I'll copy my Railclone object over here. Again, I don't need to change very much. Just select these 3, pick my original bench, forget these, they were just here for illustrative purposes, they don't need to be there. So I've got this new bench, but it hasn't got a handle in the middle, the slot in the middle. So what I'll do is I'll just copy one of these segments, hold down shift to clone. It's already got the geometry selected, so all I need to do is choose the Railclone slice source to X evenly, if I can find it, there it is, X evenly, and wire it to the evenly input. And there now you can see it's got a slot in the middle. And what I might do here is to change this. We only ever really want one of those. So what I could do is change the evenly mode to count and set the count to 1, not to 2. And now you can see I'm always going to have this slot in the middle no matter the size of this bench, which is pretty cool. So all of these are parametric, and that's a very quick way of kind of starting to cut things up. Now I'll come to this window in a minute, because this is a pretty basic example. Now we all know from possibly having done the window tutorial or having made windows in the past that can be quite a tall order, cutting those things up, and especially creating the graph for that. So I want to show you the advantage of this slicer if you've already got some templates pre-made, because you can very quickly build this whole thing. So I'm just going to rattle up, see if there are any questions here.
The first one comes from Alessio Salvi. About a Windows
yeah. I've created a window shutter exterior in a way that you can explain tutorial windows with Y evenly and how can I get saying windows open? Okay, that is a question I can't answer like immediately. Yeah, opening windows is something that's quite challenging to show in a short space of time, because you're going to get into lots of nested generators, but we have got, there's been so many changes in the workflow since the original Windows tutorial was made that we're basically going to scrap it and redo it with all the modern ways of that we would do window nowadays, including kind of rail clone slicer and that kind of thing, but opening windows and that kind of thing, because there's these things are now much easier. Keep a lookout for a new window tutorial that will go over those things, but that's probably a little bit too much for me to go into live right now. Material, follow the geometry after slicing. So it's exactly as if you sliced it. So the materials are kind of glued to the geometry, if you like. If you scale it, it's going to scale the material too. Of course, you could use the automatic UV mapping features that Railclone has to re-UV map inside of Railclone, so that wouldn't be a problem. So if you use it from inside the editor, you don't need to add the modifier. No, the modifier always needs to be applied. So that was a question there, that if you're adding it inside the modifier, you don't. So the edit, just to make that clear, the editor and the modifier work together. The geometry has a Railclone slice modifier applied, and then you, using these tick boxes and these measurements, slice it up into different pieces. Okay, and kind of, if you imagine inside, you've labeled them. You said, okay, from the start to 30 centimeters in, slice it there, that is labeled start. Okay, from the other end, 30 centimeters in, sliced it, that's labeled end. And then the default part, 30 centimeters in, then another, whatever I've written there, another half a meter along, slice that out, label that default. Then what you can do is come into the Railclone object, and what you can do then, these are all the same segment, is you can say which one of those labeled slices do I want to use for this segment, and that's what this drop down button here blocks here is. It's saying, okay, of those three that I've just sliced up, use the default one, use the one I've labeled default in the default input. Now there is an I'm going to preempt the question, which is can't we have it do that automatically, please? Which we really tried to do, but for all kinds of technical limitations to do with the way that Railclone works internally, we couldn't, and we tried all kinds of hacks. We couldn't get it to work in a way that we knew people wouldn't kind of get confused, or it wouldn't confuse people even more. Get it to automatically select the Railclone slice from the modifier, just automatically. So the solution as it stands at the moment is that you do have to specify them. However, there are a few things, like you can right click on it and use this clone for Railclone slice button, and what that will do is it will generate all of the segments automatically and set their source objects automatically, and then you can just wire them in. So that's one time saver. And as you've seen, once you've got this set up, you can just select all three and pick the new object, and then that will, you don't need to set those again. So you're only ever going to need to set these the very first time you create the style. The next style you create using that graph, don't need to set them again. It's already set. Just add new geometry. So that's why it makes sense to have kind of templates set up, which I'll show you now actually. So there's more questions. Can the hole in the middle be repetitive? Yes, the hole that hole could be repeated. So that was the question there, wasn't it? So the question there was, can this hole in the middle be repeated instead of single? And absolutely it can. So I can change my rules here from count to distance. And then what will happen is, have I got the right object? I don't think so. And then what will happen, actually I have. Then what will happen is that when there's space for a new object to be added, new handle to be added, it will. So if I reduce the size of that to 50, for example, there you go, you've got 3 now. And if I increase the size of this, you'll see it just keeps repeating them. So I hope that answers that question. Is there a way to hide the objects being clipped in Railclone? If I distributed objects using a spline, and if objects wouldn't fit, they would get clipped rather than clip. Can I just hide them? You could hide them. I'm not 100% sure about the question. Yes, I think I do understand the question. Correct me if I'm wrong. So let's imagine that this bench isn't a bench. I'm just answering some questions here. So this is a question about whether objects can be just hidden instead of clipped. Now it's going to be a little bit hard to see here, but let's imagine this is our clipping spline, and that each one of these segments we want to hide rather than just cut. So if I add this spline as a clipping area, you'll see the default behavior, which is to cut it. Okay, so you can see it's cut, and as you know, you can change the mode here. So I can change this from include to exclude, for example, and then you can see that geometry. And the nice thing here is that I can select a spline whilst having the style editor open, so you can see that slicing, and I think that's what you're referring to. What you'd like to do is hide that instead. So what you can do is to change the default in the segment settings. If you turn off slice and then turn off slice for the I'm going to change to the end one as well and turn slice off for that. So slice off for the segments that could be sliced here. Then what you can do is control what happens with a sliced segment, and actually the default mode for that is to hide them, as you can see. So now they're not sliced, just that once one is included in the clipping area, it gets removed like that. And the option with what to do with segments that are tagged as not sliceable is in this drop down here. So you either have the option to remove them, which is what the default is, or preserve them, and when you preserve them it kind of just leaves them, or you can just say, actually I don't care what that slice button says, you just slice them anyway. I've just noticed that that's the wrong way around actually. That looks like those are flipped. So preserve is doing is doing remove, yeah, that's hiding, and remove is doing what I'd expect preserve to. So I'm going to report that after this because those two options are obviously flipped, but that is how you would do it. I hope that answers that question. God, what a lot of questions. It's the handle example when the geometry is stretched. Can the handles be repeated at certain distances, or just have to? I think I've answered that. Questions about Megascan's modular building assets with Railclone. Must go to. If you have a set of high houses of different sizes, so randomized height, how can you efficiently and automatically make a flat roof inside of Railclone? That's a question for the next one, I would say. In fact, I think there is one of the previous Ask I2s where I talked about roofs, so maybe I'll post that in the comments afterwards. Can the geometry be capped? So that's a question about this slicing. Can the geometry be capped? So the geometry is not capped when it's just removed. So if I just click cap holes there, you can see nothing much happened. But if it's sliced, then you often can cap holes if it's possible, which it may not be for this mesh. But there are cap holes issues or options there for that kind of thing. So that will often do it. Animate along path macro. I'll come back to that one too. Okay, because we've got a lot to get in with the Railclone stuff. So let me just show you another quick example of Railclone Slice, and hopefully it'll show you how quickly we can cut this window up. So the slowest part of this is going to be just cutting the window up, which you'd have to do either way anyway. So I'll add a Railclone Slice modifier to this. Actually, looks like I've already done it. Well, that'll save a bit of time anyway. So the Railclone Slice modifier here, I'll just show you this quickly, is already on there. Actually, that makes sense because you don't want to watch me just add a load of slices, but you can see the basic gist here, right? So I've got exactly like we did for the benches. So I've sliced at the start, and then one at the end, and then a default segment which is picking out a glass pane here. And then obviously we've got these pieces of frame in the middle here, so I've got an X evenly for those. But the difference, and I've taken this one on the side here, the difference with the window, of course, is that this is going to be a 2D array. So we've also got to slice vertically. So this works in exactly the same way. So I would slice the bottom, and you can see there'll be a line coming up along there where I've sliced along the bottom, and then the top, slice there. And then there's no Y evenly on this particular example, but there could be. Instead, we just want a default. And so what I've got is a slice coming through here and about here. So I've basically cut out a window pane. Now, I will once again just show you how this works by hitting export slices, but this is only to illustrate. You don't need to do this. So I just want to show you what this is going to generate, and especially with this one because there are a few caveats. So first of all, you can see all the pieces here, but there are two modes for slicing when you're in A2S mode. So you can see the bottom here, actually it's sliced all the way between the start and the end. And that's included one of these bits here, and it's not the same width as the window, and so on and so forth. And it's the same with the width. It's a little bit different. It doesn't quite match the height of the default segment, and that one's going to be more of an issue. So if you're doing something that you're going to put into a 2D array like this, like a window, then what you'll want to do is to turn on these adjust Y size to default segment and adjust X size to default segments options. And now if I generate those again, you'll see that it's generated the sorts of pieces that you would expect, more likely to expect for a window. So, you know, this is the same width as the glass now. It doesn't continue all the way through. The joint at the bottom of the vertical there is a separate piece. All of that's going to work. So that's fantastic. So that's the slice operation, right? So now if we wanted to add this to window, let's assume that you've got a preset, because you've made this before, and we may ship some of these, but you've got a preset before. All you need to do is to load up a template that's got all your settings in it. And I've got one in the library here, which sort of looks like a window, right? It's got all the different intersections and things. Just load that up, pop open the style editor. Here's my style. It's a macro. See all those segments there? I don't want to create those every time, so it just makes sense to create these presets. I'm going to assign a spline though, and you can see that's kind of working. So what I can do now is just grab all of those segments, assign that window I just sliced up. It'll go through and update all of those segments and update the mesh. And if I just change the mode to quick mesh so we can see the geometry, you can see there you go, that's added a window there, which is parametric of course. So the nice thing about that now is that if I want 20 more windows, all of different sizes, all I need to do is to draw the splines. Just, I mean, I can't imagine what kind of building this would be, but it's just to illustrate. And then we can switch to that new spline and we'll get all of those different windows automatically. So you can see that process of taking an existing model and slicing it and then dropping it into Railclone is hopefully much faster if you follow these workflows. And I hope that answers some questions. Have we got any more questions there?
It's made a call to feedback besides Dragon.
Just some feedback. Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Great.
So any active
Good and
responses
active.
to
I love it.
it.
Okay,
Yep.
great. Lovely, you might think. Let's just pick up a couple of other bits and pieces. Let's say you'd made these. Let's say you've made these objects and you'd want to reuse them somewhere, and you think, oh, I'd like to save those to the library. Thank you very much. Just one thing we can do now is to make library addition much easier. So I will just show you this now. This is basically similar to the Forest Pack workflow if you've used Forest Pack in the recent versions. And we will have, by the time this comes out, an extra button here which opens the Railclone library without you having to create a Railclone object. At the moment, to open the library, you're just going to have to create a Railclone object first. So it's no big deal. So this will change. So we'll just pop open the Railclone library. So let's say I want to create a new library with these 4 benches and that window in it. What you do is come to a folder that you've got control over, create a library, give it a name, and then select the objects that you want to import. I should probably have applied the materials to these, but let's not worry about it for now. And then right click in here, and at the bottom here we've got this new option. Actually, this library browser has been completely rewritten, but anyway, we've got this new option which is import Railclone objects from scene. And here you have these options that, again, if you're a Forest Pack user, you will be familiar with. It's going to automatically save these out to a new 3ds Max scene file, and you can give that a name here. You can create a material library if you want to, but really the only reason to do that is if you're creating a library that supports multiple different renderers, in which case you'll want to create multiple material libraries, and this can be the basis for that. I'm not supporting multiple different renderers, so I'll leave that as is. You can choose to collect the assets, which will bring all of the texture files in and save those in the same location as the library, which is a good idea. And you can also choose to create thumbnails. So these are viewport captures of the assets. So because I haven't added the textures to them, actually, they're probably not going to look fantastic, but if they're textured, they're quite passable. And then you just click import and just let it do its thing. And that will give you a little bit of info there about what it's done. And you can see in my library now I've got my 4 benches and my window all ready to go. And now next time I create a Railclone object, I can just load one of those in and everything will be hunky-dory. So that's a much quicker way of adding things to the library. If you're creating Railclone styles and you quickly want to start saving them out to libraries, that is going to save you hopefully a lot of time. There. Good. Are there any more questions?
Not at all.
Not at all. Okay. Regarding the, let me have a look. I can tell you very quickly if that macro works in the Railclone Lite version by just taking a look at it, and then what I'll do is see if I can record a tutorial, animate long path, record a tutorial about it. Oh, just another little thing. I like these little things. You want to go into a macro now, just double click on it and it opens the macro up instead of having to right click, so that sort of thing makes me happy. Looks like it should work in the Lite version. There's only 2 segments there, so I'll look at maybe doing a quick tutorial on that. And while we're on the subject of these new improvements, let's say I wanted to turn this into a macro in Railclone 6. If you've ever tried this, you'll know that anytime you bring a segment into a macro or a numeric node, it will give you, a spline input, it will give you, I'll add a spline actually to illustrate, it will give you an error and you'll have to go in and add those all again manually in the macro. So that's all changed in this version. If you want to create a macro, all you actually need to do now is to create the macro, select the geometry, copy it, open the macro, paste it. Now it's converted all of those segments into inputs, and those are now available in your macro there. So that's a very quick way of creating a macro. Of course, you might want to rename them and so forth, but that's a very quick way of turning a graph into a macro. You can just copy and paste it in, and it just does that for you, which is super quick. You can change the order of the inputs if you want to from up here. And of course rename them and everything else. So there's loads of other stuff to do with macros that's worth talking about, but I'm just focusing on the bigger things today. Some of these things are much easier to understand from the release notes than others. But the slicer in particular, I just wanted to give a little demo of so that people can start to play with it, and hopefully it makes some sort of sense and starts the conversation. Great. So I import a lot of Railclone objects. How do I embed geometry? The geometry is embedded automatically. So that's a question. I import a lot of Railclone objects from my library. How do I embed geometry? Geometry is embedded when you export it. It's saved inside the Railclone object, kind of like Booleans do or other compound objects, and you can see it says they're embedded. And then if you ever want to get it out again, you just click this button up here to extract it, and then you'll get that geometry back out again. So there's no need to really consciously do that. It just does it when you export it automatically. It's the same if I delete this source geometry here. The Railclone object's still fine because it's saved a copy of that inside itself. Okay, so you don't need to kind of import the Railclone object and the geometry as well. That will sort of happen automatically if that's your question. And that last comment is yes, copy and paste into macros. That is a big time saver. I 100% agree with you. That's really nice, and hopefully that will encourage more people to create macros as well, making it that much simpler, because it's a really nice way to sort of organize your graphs and make units of your graphs reusable, and it's all round just a great way to work, I think, with Railclone, creating these macros. So yeah, hopefully that'll help. Another thing that I haven't mentioned is the ability to copyright or protect your graphs too. So you can, I'm just trying to remember how to do it actually. There it is, under style. So if you are the kind of person who is creating Railclone objects and you want to distribute them, but you don't want people to get into your graph and mess with things, then you can go up to the style editor up here and hit protect by password, and you can type a password in there. And then when you close the style editor and open it again, it should prompt you for a password, probably because I've just opened it, but it will normally from a fresh scene prompt you for a password so that you can't get into a style without entering it. So that can save some time. Are there any specific updated workflows to go from Max UE5 for Railclone Forest Pack, or it's the same as the previous? Yeah, that's pretty much the same, because in the previous video it was using whatever the thing is called Unreal uses. Someone remind me what it's called, but it's using that export process, so that hasn't changed. And the export part is actually handled by Epic using our SDK, so they have been responsible for implementing support for us, if that makes sense. There may be different ways we'd all choose to work with it, but I would say the workflow is still much the same. In fact, I would still, with Forest Pack especially, be exporting markers really and swapping it for real-time trees in Unreal. Copyright, yes. Okay, yeah, good. Okay. So that's probably the end of my little bit of Datasmith. Thank you. Yeah, my mind went blank there. Yeah, the Unreal export thing is called Datasmith. That's what I was groping for. Lovely. Okay. I'm going to move on from that now, because there was one last thing that we got asked actually a bunch of times in the last few weeks, which you won't surprise anyone who's been on social media for the last couple of weeks, which is obviously Tyflow was updated with a bunch of terrain tools, and as you can imagine, the first thing we got asked was, can you use those with Forest Pack? And you can, so that's good. But so I just wanted to do a quick intro to the Tyflow terrain tools, very quick, because there are tutorials out there for that, so if it piques your interest, go and hunt around for those. But I just wanted to mention those, and then how you'd use it with Forest Pack. And actually, you know, which is, it's always nice, you don't really have to do anything particularly special to get it to work with Forest Pack, it just does work. But there are a couple of things that, you know, might be worth knowing that can help you out of that. And just while I am talking to you, 3ds Max has just crashed, so I'll have to keep talking for another 30 seconds while I reopen it. If anyone's got any questions, this would be a good time.
Well, regarding Datasmith and Unreal Engine, I mean, obviously we are aware of the increasing presence of Unreal Engine in the industry, and we are thinking about it, and we are testing stuff. But as Paul mentioned, everything that has to do with export, it's on Epic's side.
Yeah.
They manage Datasmith, and other thing is trying to make our plugins more friendly with Unreal Engine, say in some way. So we have some ideas. Some things that obviously we can't unveil right now, but for you guys to know, it's on our radar. Everything that has to do with Unreal Engine, we are totally aware that the industry is going that way. So yeah,
that's a good point. Yeah, we're not inactive in that respect at all. We've done we've been quite proactive in some senses. We just haven't got much we can talk publicly about at the moment.
Yeah. In fact, from the survey we did in a few weeks ago, Unreal Engine seems to be the tool that everyone is willing to use right now. So again, we are aware of it, we're working on it. There's nothing we can unveil at the moment. You'll know we are a very small team, but we hope to have news very soon.
Yeah. Good. So I'm currently cursing how slow 3ds Max takes to load up, but I think we're all familiar with that dilemma. Out of interest, just from anyone who's how is the build? That's a good question. How is the building up of the new library of Forest Pack and Railclone going on? Do you want to take that one, Jaime?
Cool. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think we can show it.
I don't think I've got any.
There's going to be 5 new libraries totally revamped in this version of Railclone 6. The idea, as we mentioned in previous videos, it's to have everything ready by the end of the year. So
that's a complete revamp, right, of everything existing.
It's a complete revamp of all the libraries, all the free assets that come with Railclone, which I think right now it's up to 550, something like that. And we are gonna add new stuff. So as we mentioned, we have a new guy in the team since last summer, and he's fully working on it. There will be new assets with Railclone 6. 5 new collections, and our goal is to revamp the whole thing before the end of the year. So that answers Amit's question.
Perfect.
And
thank you.
Sorry for my voice, by the way.
That's okay.
Yeah.
What's wrong with it? You sound fine.
It's...
Okay, so Max has just decided to start up again. I'm interested to know how many people have tried these new Typhoon terrain tools. I mean, from my part, obviously, I've used terrain modeling tools as third-party applications a lot in the past, and always a standalone, separate thing. So having a terrain generator inside of Max directly is quite exciting. Especially because it's quite fast, and also there's a free version. Tyflow Free has all of the terrain tools, so they're just a bit slower than they would be in Tyflow Pro. So there's not really a lot of excuse to not give them a go. And like I said, the nice thing is they work with Forest Pack. So I'll just do a quick sort of from scratchy type thing. Now I should say I'm not a Tyflow expert, so I'm finding my way with this and just exploring how it interacts with our tools at the moment. So apologies if I do anything silly. So Tyflow is up here. We just drag something in the scene, and again, apologies if you've done this 1,000 times, but maybe there are some people out there who haven't tried it yet. We have Tyflow's editor, which if you're not used to particle systems, it's actually quite nice and simple, but there are a lot of nodes down here to play with, because Tyflow is a simulator. You can do so much with it. It's simulator, it's physics, it's liquid. You can do so much. And the terrain editor is just the most recent thing that's been added to this. So really what I'd like to do is just see the stuff that relates to terrains, because I'm only going to be terrain editing. And the second tab in from the right here, if I click on that, I just see the terrain editing tools. So that site hides all the other stuff, and that's a good thing for me at the moment, because I'm not worrying about anything else. You've got about over 20 nodes here for terrains. It's actually very intuitive and very easy to use, which is good. But the first thing you need to do is to generate a terrain. So you drag a birth terrain node in here, and that's just going to create a terrain for you. So one of the most important things, and I'd be interested to know if I'm interpreting this correctly, but it seems to me that it always creates a terrain at 250 of whatever the current sort of scene measurements are. So like if I go to my unit setup and go to system unit setup, I've changed it to meters to make it as big as possible, and that's likely to be the size you're using for terrains. So it's basically creating at 250 of whatever that is. So thing to be aware of there is that if you've got that set to centimeters, your terrain's going to be 250 centimeters. If it's millimeters, it's going to be 250 millimeters, and so on and so forth. Now, my understanding of this is that it's not a good idea, therefore, just to think, do you know what? If I was in centimeters, I actually want this to be 2 kilometers, because all of the other nodes, like the erosion and so on and so forth, are kind of, the presets are kind of optimized to work on that original scale, or that some version of nearby that scale. So what you'll end up doing if you do something like that, so maybe I want this to be a lot bigger, if I add a noise to that, for example, at that scale, it's going to be more like dirt than what you want it to be, which is something sort of much more like hills. So as I understand, you would leave this as it is at 250 meters in this case, do all your stuff, whatever it is, design your landscape, and then right at the end you can add a terrain transform and then scale it up from here. So if I go into terrain transform and hit absolute on scale, then if I change this to say 4 kilometers, that's, well, 4,000, let's say, then the whole thing scales up proportionately and my design remains in sort of intact. So that's how I've been playing with it anyway. So I'm going to make this 1 kilometer at the end, just for illustrative purposes. So that's kind of how I've understood that works. Just seeing a question there, actually, just like particle flow, can Chaos Phoenix be used by i2 software? Any example, a great deal of help. I'm not sure how you're expecting Chaos Phoenix to work with Forest Pack, but I did try scattering Phoenix objects with Forest Pack as volume grids, and that does work, since Forest Pack can now scatter non-geometric objects. In fact, there is a tutorial somewhere on our YouTube channel that demonstrates scattering like a fire bucket with Phoenix flames inside it multiple times in a landscape. So have a look at that if that's kind of what you're going for. That might be it. Okay, so this, like any terrain editing software, it works with a series of noises and erosion. It's very nice, very controllable. So we've got your birth terrain, you've got a terrain noise here, and like there's tons of lovely presets you can use. So you can use messes, you just pick them. There are kind of canyons. There's all sorts of things like this that are really, really nice. I'm just going to go for the kind of bumpy for now, just keep it simple. Ooh, maybe hilly. Let's go for that. So you can of course mix these. So like another thing you could do, for example, is to use where is it? There's a terrain slope, which is quite cool. If you want to add a mountain or something somewhere specific, you can do that. So this kind of works like this with a graph here, and you can see you've got different options. You can either make it linear on one axis or the other axis, or you can make it radial, which is going to create your kind of conical shape, and then you can always change the shape of it using a graph. So you could make it pointy or much rounder or or whatever you want. Make it a bit lower, and of course you can choose things like change the height of it. So we're mixing this with the noise below at the moment, so if we wanted just a little bit of mountain over in one corner, for example, we can change the scale on the X and the Y. Maybe it's only 0.2 and 0.2, so a little, or maybe that's a bit too small, 0.4, 0.4, and then we can kind of slide it around in the landscape like so. So I'm just doing this on the fly here without too much thought. Don't take this as an example of good terrain design. So something like that, and we can change the order of that. Maybe let's put the noise on top. Okay, so that's that kind of thing. And another thing that's really cool is the ability to affect the terrain with some kind of object. So maybe we have a road coming through here, for example, something like that, and what we could do is to I'm actually gonna reference that and then make that reference renderable, and just give it a bit of rectangular size, so make it 6 meters. And the reason for doing that with a renderable spline is that, hey, potentially now that spline, that source spline becomes something I could use in Forest Pack afterwards to put something along the landscape there. But where this is interesting now is that I can use that mesh that's generated there to affect the landscape. So maybe I want to burrow a road through there. You can add a terrain, object to terrain there. Let's add that to the top and pick that object. And then you've got a few options. So I want to set the size. I want to set it down there. This is where the fact that I've scaled it is messing things up a little bit. So there we go. You can see what that's doing now. I could get around that, but I'm just going to leave it like this for now. So you can see that's kind of burrowing a road through there. Now it's just a little bit hard, that transition. So you've got a fall off here that you can use, and we can set this to set as well, and gradually affect that landscape. So you can see I'm kind of now cutting through that hill with my road, and so on and so forth. So you can see it's really powerful, basically. It's really powerful. And then on top of that, you've got erosion effects, which can do some really awesome stuff like this. Again, there are presets here, so we've got various different types of erosion. Flowing streams, for example, is quite nice. You can just play with these. And again, you can do this in the free one. You just have to wait a little bit longer for it to build, but it will build. Craggy cliffs, quite good fun. All that kind of stuff. There's also filters and effects. So filters can be used to kind of add some kind of effect over the top of it. This is like your kind of blurs, clamps, denoises, that kind of thing. Basically adjustments, if you want to see them as adjustment layers to the black and white kind of texture, if you imagine like that creates this height map. And then effects are a little bit cooler than that. So what you've got here is various presets for doing adding kind of effects over the top of your existing terrain. So here I'm adding rugged rocks here, or lumpy ones, or you can come up here and you've got other presets, like I could stratify this and create that kind of ridged appearance that you get, and then actually maybe I'd want to erode that again afterwards. That would be nice. So we could go for another erosion top of that. Maybe that's a bit too harsh. Anyway, you get the idea. It's fun. You can play with it. Yeah. So we end up with maybe something like this. And then what you can also do is to start to colorize it automatically. So there's terrain color here, which will allow you to colorize this, basically using a bunch of presets again. So from here we could go Highland Streams and see how this looks. So none of this is directly related to Forest Pack at the moment. I'm just talking about it generally. Okay, so that's pretty cool. Yeah, so that works quite nicely. Or you can try others. That's perhaps a better one for what I want to illustrate in a second. Okay, lovely. So as you can see, that's very, very powerful. But how do I use that with Forest Pack? So first of all, let me transform that back up again, and just put that there. So first things first is that Forest Pack or not, this currently wouldn't render, and that's because this terrain display here is only used for viewports. So this will display everything very fast and nice in the viewports, but it's not going to actually produce a mesh that renders. So what we want to do, sorry, I'm just adding a very quick lighting setup here. What we want to do is to output a mesh that we can not only render but use with Forest Pack, of course, and that is done using the terrain mesh option. So we just pop that in there like that. Nothing seemingly will change except for the fact that you'll lose your texture because the terrain mesh doesn't have a material applied to it. There are a few ways you can add that material, but there's a very quick way, which is to use this option here which says set up vertex color text map, and if you click on that it will add the vertex colors to the mesh and it will create a very basic material which you can use to visualize them, which will be a standard material, I think, as I recall. So what you might want to do is change that to a V-Ray material or Corona or whatever you're using. Arnold. I'm not sure what it's compatible with, but well, vertex color should be compatible with pretty much everything, I guess. Well, I should have left that as it was. Display's funny in V-Ray. Anyway. Let's leave it as it is for now. Okay. It would have rendered fine. Good. So that's your terrain. Yes, there's a few comments saying it's amazing. Yeah, it is. It's really cool, and I love that it's directly inside 3ds Max. So now that I've got a terrain here, I want to scatter on it with Forest Pack. Now the original reason I did this is because a few people contact us with questions about how to get masks out of Tyflow basically that we can use with Forest Pack, and that's totally possible. But I did also want to point out that certain masks that people are trying to export, like slope masks and height masks and things like that, there's not really any need to export them because Forest Pack's got its own tools that can do that, and they're probably faster to generate. It's probably faster to use those than it is to generate a mask. So what you would do in that case is just add a forest object as you would normally, in which case I'm just going to pick a random tree because we're not going to render it anyway. So I'll just pick something from here. That doesn't matter. That'll do. And then I can just pick this from the scene in the usual way. As you can see, because it's a mesh, I can scatter on it. Eventually, there we go. There's a lot of objects. So, yeah, I mean, I scattered a kilometre. This is a kilometre wide, this thing, and actually looking at the scale of my trees there, this probably should be a bigger environment, but rather than going to cheat and rather than scaling the environment up, I'm going to scale my trees down instead. Okay. Rightio. So, now obviously if you look at that original texture, a lot of it is based on slope and height. So if we wanted to, and everyone knows this I'm sure, if we wanted to limit the slope angle, we can come into the surfaces rollout, come into slope range, and then just reduce this angle here, and you can see I can start to get very close to where those green patches are already on the ground there. So that's sort of pretty much getting a similar approach to what was probably used to add that green area in Tyflow. And the altitude range, of course, is set here too. So if I turn on altitude range limited, then I can control then my number of trees based on altitude range too. And I think, as you all know, you can do this using fall off graphs. If you didn't want a hard fall off, you can just gradually reduce the density and the scale of trees instead of them just cutting off hard like that. And the same with scale. So all of those things are possible without maps. But if you did want to get maps out, this is how you do it. So we'll turn that off now for now and just go back to this version, and then we can see how we could use a mask from Tyflow instead to mask a forest pack object. So there's tons of places you can export masks from Tyflow. So anywhere, like in terrain, for example, you can generate a flow mask, you can generate an erosion mask separately. Any of these are fair game for Forest Pack. They'll work in Forest Pack. What I'm going to do though, just to keep things simple now, is just assume, well, I've got this texture, and wherever there's green in my mask, I'm probably going to want to plant something with Forest Pack. And so what I want to do is to export a mask that represents this green area. And if I look at my terrain color here, I can see this list of gradients here, and one of them is very obviously green, so I'll click on that to bring up its settings, and then scroll down a little bit. And if you keep coming down, somewhere it says layer copy out and it says mask channel. So basically what you do is turn that on there, and then give it a name. I'm just going to call it Forest Pack mask. Doesn't have to be called that. You can call it anything you like. And that's generating a mask called that. So we need that now to be accessible to Forest Pack. So to do that, we can come to our material editor. I realized that was off the screen, so you wouldn't have seen that. I'm going to right click on that, go to maps, general, and way down there there's something called tie terrain color. Okay, so this lets you basically output any of the channels that you've set up inside of your terrain, your Tyflow terrain. What you have to do though is to assign the terrain from which you want to create the map. So I'll just click on that button and pick it from the scene. And by default it's producing the color, right? So this is another way, if you didn't want to use vertex colors, this is another way in which you could texture your terrain. But we want it to generate a mask instead that we can use Forest Pack. So what we have to do is remember the name we gave that mask, which is FP mask, and capitals is case sensitive. And now you can see it's generated a mask based on the green parts of my terrain color. I can then use that in Forest Pack, and you could use it anywhere. In this case, I'm going to use it as a distribution mask. So I'll just pop that in the map there, and then you can see now I've only got trees where the green areas are. Now this is not pure white. There's obviously gradients here. There's some light greys. There's going up to pure white and stuff like that. So this is where the threshold option in Forest Pack comes in. Basically, the threshold refers to those grey colours, and it tells Forest Pack at what point does a pixel on one of those masks become a tree or a gap. So if I reduce that, you'll get more trees filling in those grey areas, and if you increase it, you'll get fewer trees. So you can just play with that setting to get it roughly where you want. Now the other obvious problem here is that it's in a grid-like sort of formation, so we just break that up by coming into transform, just turning on a bit of translation, rotation, randomization, rotation, randomization, scale randomization, and so on. So that does a pretty good job of doing that. And then in the geometry rollout, if you wanted to add some little gaps in that, then you could by adding another object and setting it to disabled, and then you can see that you can control, you know, the number of little gaps in that to give you something more like the default kind of distribution map, if that's what you wanted, something like that. The other advantage of having a disabled segment in there, item, sorry, in there, is that you can also use clusters if you want to. So you could create little clearings inside of those green areas if you wanted to, and sort of variations in density like that. So I can add a bit of noise in there and blur the sides a little bit and stuff like that. So there's tons you can do with that, but that's the basic process for getting a mask out of Tyflow and using it in Forest Pack there. So hopefully that makes some kind of sense. But you can see it's really quite straightforward to use the two together like that. And I think I will do a proper pre-recorded tutorial on some sort of landscape creation with Tyflow and Forest Pack, because there's loads of other stuff you can do with this, and I think like especially adding splines that not only deform the landscape but can be used by Forest Pack to distribute things as well would be really good, and think there's a lot of things we can look at for this. Could you
in fact, Paul, sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, go on.
In fact, guys, I mean, we've been discussing how we can improve this monthly Q&A and the live streams, and one of the things we discussed is bringing third-party softwares and see how they can work with the plugins. So this is a clear example. The other thing that we have discussed is bringing having guests outside of the company. So we are working on it. We would like to share ideas with.
Yeah.
So we're working on it, and we should have news about that shortly. So there will be new faces from other companies, from studios, from schools, brought in the monthly Q&As to talk and have chat with us and share their knowledge. So that's what we have ahead.
Yeah. Could you use there's a couple of questions. Could you use a secondary mask to have something like water lilies on water? You absolutely could. You can have as many masks as you want. You just would give them different names, and you would just have a different Thai terrain color map with a different name in it, and it would pick up that mask instead. That's no problem. You could combine masks. I mean, the other obvious use for these masks is actually texture, because I mean this is quite cool, but also you might well use these masks to start mixing together Megascans textures or something like that, to actually texture the surfaces as well, which is not something Forest Pack related necessarily, but it's an important use for these masks, I think, for getting that kind of level of close-up realism with tiling, probably tiling textures, with triplanar mapping and all that kind of stuff, to get all this stuff working together, and then you'll get some really nice effects with that. Terrain color might be a bit iffy for not yet. Terrain color part, I don't know the terrain color support for non-V-Ray renderers, but in terms of how Forest Pack uses it, I'm not sure it matters as long as it can be evaluated in the viewports, because we're not actually rendering it. But certainly if you're using it for texturing, then all this information can also be dumped into the Vertex color channel, and pretty much every renderer, I imagine, supports Vertex colors, so that will work fine. We'd love to see how people use i2 in their practical workflow and day-to-day work. Yes, great. That's what we're hoping to start showcase over the next few weeks, the next few months, sorry. Next few live streams, just getting guests in and getting them to share some of their tips. That's the aim, is to kind of keep it learning based, and help you to understand how other people use it in real life. Good. Are there any other questions or comments that anyone wants to make?
Not at all.
No. Then I think for now, because I've probably talked for too long already, we'll wrap this one up. Yeah, I have talked for too long.
Is this Paul? I think this marks a 1 year anniversary since we started doing this, right?
Yes, you're right. It's our 13th. It's our 13th one of these, but the first one was during lockdown, and then we had a gap, and then we started again last February. You're right. So yeah, this is a year's worth of live streams.
It's been fantastic. I mean, thanks everyone, because you guys show up for the live streams here, and then they have a very nice amount of views on YouTube. So we are very happy to do this. Very satisfying.
Yeah.
So thanks everyone.
Thank you very much, everyone, and we'll see you in a month's time. Keep an eye out. We'll probably start with a guest next time. Do you think, Jaime?
I'm not sure with all the Railclone 6 release.
Oh yeah, Railclone 6. Yeah, okay. Yeah, the next one might be about Railclone 6.
Yeah, but we can assure that after Railclone 6 we'll have guest speakers, and we will be talking about third-party softwares working with our tools. That's the goal. I mean, the goal is to expand the knowledge of all the attendees to these videos. So the more we can cover, the best. Okay.
Yeah. And also keep the questions and requests coming, because it's really helpful to know what you want to know, and what you'd like to see more of, and any questions you've got about working with other tools, working with our tools with other tools. All of that is helpful fodder. So just let us know. Also, guests you might like to see. We can get in touch with them and go from there. So yeah.
Again, any feedback on the beta version of Raycon 6 will be more than welcome. So yes. I'm giving you guys the link here again. Where is it? And please feel free to just send in. There you go. And that's all.
Great. See you next time.
Yep. Bye. Cheers.